the capacity for each of your other building rooms with that kind of spacing. And it's a challenge because if you're dealing with a family of 3 coming and sitting together, that spacing will change who can be in that row versus one person, right? So somebody's going to have to be mapping out, if you're coming back and you don't have enough space, how those families are going to be seated. And somebody's going to have to know where to put the families so that they're seated properly. So how you do that, your session should figure out how that's going to happen. You should, once people are seated, you should make clear, once they're in the seat that you're giving them, that they need to stay seated. We're not talking about coming up for communion or coming up for any other purpose, right? You stay seated. You should continue to limit your worship and your meeting lengths when practical. Proper ventilation is important, right? Ideally, nothing that blows air around is going on in that room. Instead, open your windows and provide fresh air. If you have a ceiling fan that's going, have it draw air upward away from people if it has to go. You can use window fans to exhaust indoor air outside, but not to blow air in. All right. Hand sanitizing and disinfectant protocols should stay in place. All right, and that includes disinfecting shared objects, disinfecting seating if you're going to have more than one group in the room without a long period of time in between, disinfecting musical equipment, robes if you're a pastor who's doing more than one service and you're robing, disinfecting your robe somehow. You need to have as I say all these things, they need to be consistently enforced. It does no good to be doing this in worship while you have another group using your fellowship hall or your other building space that's not following the protocol. So you need to, if you're opening your building for more than worship, you need to make sure that every group in your building is following these same kinds of protocols we're talking about, right? So that COVID is not coming into the building and exposing a group that is following the protocols. You should limit anything that's passed. So collection plates, if you're not doing electronic giving, collection plates need to be towards the back and people pass them on their way out or their way in. And you're gonna have two-way traffic, one-way traffic. So it's gonna be one way or the other on your way in or way out. Communion elements, if you're going to do communion elements, and this is the first time we've talked about possibility of communion again, we're talking about things like those small individual communion cups / bread that you can get, right? If you're doing that, they should be picked up in advance on the way in. You're not distributing them when people are seated. You're prohibiting passing food and beverages. You don't want to do that. Obviously, you don't want to do things like a covered meal, right? Or a covered dish meal or a buffet in the room. Food and drink should only be consumed when you're seated. Somebody asked me a question last week, could their AA group bring in beverages? And the answer would be individuals could bring in, under these criteria, a cup of coffee with them, for instance, if they were coming in, as long as you have a way to dispose of a disposable cup safely afterwards. But you should not be pouring coffee for people, in the room. You should have a way to discourage your congregants or any members of a group gathering from congregating before or after the meetings. So you want to close lobbies or fellowship halls or other things like that if people are going to gather there. Any space that you think might become a gathering space indoors, you want to stop from being open. And that means probably no fellowship hour, unless you can figure out some way to do that with strict social distancing. Maybe you can, and maybe somebody can share creative ways to do that. That would be great. But otherwise, no fellowship hour. Small spaces, close them off, unless like an elevator, if you need it, it should be one person in that elevator at a time if you have an elevator. But otherwise, small spaces should be closed so that you're not putting people within a 6-foot distance of each other. You're still looking, I know you don't want to hear this, but you're still looking at minimizing congregational participation. This is one of the reasons that in some ways our Zoom meetings or our pre-recorded meetings have possibilities that right now our face-to-face meetings indoors don't, right? Is that you can have lots of different people participate in a Zoom worship meeting, or lots of different people pre-record and put things on. You can have the congregation all say something on a Zoom meeting and turn on, it sounds a little bit like speaking in tongues, but you can turn on the mic and everybody can say a prayer together. In face-to-face worship at the moment, the request is to not have congregational participation, minimize it as much as possible. No public singing during worship still, until we've got herd immunity. And herd immunity, we're talking about that 75%, right? Then Dr. Fauci, for instance, who's become sort of the well-known expert on this, right, says, if you're indoors for a long time with a lot of people who are singing, shouting, speaking, and not wearing masks, that's the highest risk. And so you're trying to minimize that through all these criteria. So if you insist on some vocal singing, it should be one masked person singing, ideally away from the rest of the folks. And this would include what I'm going to talk about next. Worship leaders should be 12 feet away from congregants, and that would include singers as well, as minimally 12 feet. So that may mean closing the first, depending how your chancel area is set up, it may mean closing the first or second pew, so nobody is sitting in it. And as you figure out who can be in your sanctuary, and it's going to depend on your building. So I'm looking at Tim Ives, for instance. Tim, your building is perfect for that. You've got that distance, right? You don't need to do anything else because of where you're, as long as you stay up in the chancel area, you're good. Some of our other buildings literally are right, the chancel is right next to the first pew. And in which case you really need to close those pews, and singers, the same thing. You need to put in your bi-directional traffic markers in the building if you're going to be having people in there now. So you can use signs or tape, but figure out how to maximize the social distance between people as they enter and as they exit. So worship is over. Everybody can't just stand up and go, they can't go over and greet each other. So now they're going to be trying to go out. How are you going to space them out so they're leaving, right? Without a problem. Now we go to bathrooms. For communal bathrooms, if you're going to open your bathrooms, I know some people have said, well, we're going to do worship, but we're not going to open our bathrooms. I don't know how you do that if somebody needs to use a bathroom. So, but if you're going to open your bathrooms, if you have communal bathrooms, if you can't do 6 feet of separation between toilets or sinks, so if you have a single stall bathroom and it's just a single individual bathroom with a sink and a toilet, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about where there are 2 or 3 booths in a bathroom, for instance. If you don't have 6 feet in between them, then you need to either close off alternating stalls, or you need to put in some kind of physical barrier between the individual stalls so that there is division, right? You need to have touch soap dispensers, touch-free soap dispensers, touch-free towel dispensers, not air dryers. If you have air dryers, you need to figure out how to make sure nobody uses them, all right? And you need to have appropriate signage. Air dryers are a disaster in the bathroom, apparently, at this point. So don't let them use them. So you're going to have to teach people to wait outside. If you have a bathroom with only, let's say, 2 stalls, people are going to have to space out outside. You can only use one outside in a hall to use a bathroom. You need signage that explains how to do that because people are used to how you've always used the bathrooms before. So it's those kinds of details that you need to work out. Now,